Hey everyone, it's Friday, so that means it is time for another MTG Top 10. This week, we'll be looking at another Eldritch Moon related list, just like we did last week. It's still, a really new set, a lot of fun to talk about, and this is one of the ways for me to do that. And this week, we're going to look at the top 10 cards for EDH and Commander in Eldritch Moon. These are cards, basically, that I think are the most likely to see play somewhere in EDH. Sometimes I'll have a specific place in mind for them. Other times, it'll be a little more general, but we'll talk about that as we go. So at number 10... I have Cryptolith Fragment. It's the mana rock in the set, and mana rocks usually show up somewhere in EDH. This one is, in a lot of ways, a worse Darksteel Ingot or Commander Sphere, but any sort of deck that really excels at dealing damage would be happy with this card, especially in multiplayer, because it makes each player lose life, including yourself, but also all of your opponents, while you also get to fix your mana. Any deck that wants to be doing both of those things probably should run Cryptolith Fragment. Granted, it's probably not going to transform all that regularly. If it does, there's a pretty tense game going on where everyone's below 10. But the fact that it fixes your mana and does damage to everybody is pretty relevant for a lot of decks. So I could see it being a mana rock people want to run in, any sort of really aggressive deck, or a burn deck that I guess isn't mono red. Probably not worth running if you're not, it's not Sulfuric Vortex or anything like that. Kind of close though. 1 damage. Hey, so let's go ahead and move on to number 9. Tutor effects are always good in EDH, even ones that are sort of narrow and only go after legendary cards. Captain Sasay is already a pretty popular commander that fit this card, Thalia's Lancers, fits right into, since the deck is already filled with toolbox legendary creatures. But it is worth noting that this can grab any kind of legendary permanent, something Sasay can't do. Wait, maybe she can. She might be able to. Time of Need can't do it, though. So she can this card can grab Umezawa's Jitte, legendary lands, legendary enchantments. There's lots of legendary lands and Umezawa's Jitte in a lot of EDH decks, and having a card that can just fetch that for you is great. By the way, first strike with Umezawa's Jitte is also a pretty nice thing to have, so they go together pretty well. At number 8, I have another tutor effect, which is Eldritch Evolution. Here's another one that I think is likely to see some play, based on the fact it's on this list. Green already has no shortage of ways to toolbox out creatures, but I think it would be happy to get another way to tutor them out, and Eldritch Evolution definitely provides that. You do have to sacrifice a creature, but luckily the card says or less when it talks about tutoring, so you have a lot of your deck open to you depending on what you sacrifice. You can probably find whatever it is you needed, especially if you know exactly what's in your deck, which is a good idea anyway. So sort of like a fixed natural order, I guess. That's a very expensive tutor that's very good that people who can afford it can get. But if you're looking for a more budget version of a good green tutor, then this is one of them. So, and maybe over time it'll end up being expensive because of Commander, but for now I don't see it being expensive. Maybe it'll see play in Constructed somewhere. At number 7, I have Liana. Planeswalkers always find a place in EDH. It's kind of a cheat to put them on here, I guess. I think this one will obviously fit nicely into any graveyard-based commander deck, such as Carador, Ghost Chieftain, as well into any zombie-themed deck, as well as black decks in general. I mean, having a 3-mana Planeswalker is great. It is a little less good in Commander, just like it's not as good in Limited, because you want to be playing like bombier things in Commander than a 3-mana Planeswalker. But it's still pretty good. I mean, in Constructed is where she's probably going to shine the most. But again, she has enough synergies for certain decks, zombies, and graveyard-based decks, that I think she'll see play anyway. At number 6, we have the new Thalia, who hoses people just like the old Thalia did. I think she'll see lots of play in EDH. She can even be a fun commander for a hate bear deck, although Gadok Teague is probably far better than that. But she's a great one-sided effect to really hamstring your opponents. Most non-monocolored EDH decks are loaded with non-basics, and most decks run creatures, so she definitely puts a damper on a lot of people's plans, slowing them significantly. At number 5, I have Imprisoned in the Moon. This card is pretty sweet. It gives blue something it kind of desperately needed. It already has a little bit of this, but removal that doesn't actually remove something. Sometimes blue transforms things. Imprisoned in the Moon lets them remove stuff. Other than creatures, though, which is usually all blue can muster, unless it's bouncing. I'm thinking of Pongify, rapid hybridization, things that can destroy creatures but transforms them, but it only can target creatures. This also lets you deal with planeswalkers, which are a big problem, and occasionally there's problem lands too. I mean, so that could happen. I think more frequently it'll hit planeswalkers or creatures. It does turn it into a land that can add 1 colorless to a mana pool, But that's a pretty big power down in Commander. Usually that one extra mana, especially in the latter part of the game, isn't going to kill you. I mean, especially if you're shutting down your opponent's Sorin or whatever with Imprison in the Moon. It's something blue really needed, and I'm glad they got it for Commander. At number 4, I have Tamio Field Researcher, another Planeswalker. I think this one is even more likely than Liliana to see play for a few reasons. One that I think her power level is just higher. But the other is that there isn't already a Bant Planeswalker in existence, and there's several, I was surprised when I looked this up myself. I didn't realize how many Bant commanders are, but there's several popular Bant commanders. To name a few, Angus Mackenzie, Derevi, Feldegriff, Janara, Rafik, and Rune. And they're going to be pumped to have this powerful of a card in their deck. You know, it can lock your opponent's creatures down, it can draw you cards, and the emblem is ridiculous. It's like one of the stronger ones perhaps ever. I mean, that might be some hyperbole, but it's very strong. Omniscience plus Ancestral Recall is ridiculous and awesome. So if your opponent lets you get there, they just lose the game in Commander. It's as simple as that. Not all Planeswalkers ultimates quite do that, but Tamio's basically gets you there. All right, so at number 3, we have Mind's Dilation. This card I don't have here based on power level alone, but I think it has EDH written all over it. It says, first of all, whenever an opponent does something, and if you're playing a multiplayer game, that's going to be every turn, especially because in this case, it's just when they cast a spell. As long as your opponent's casting spells, you're going to get a shot at casting a free spell. If not on their turn, it would have to be an instant. Then on your turn, you're going to have tons of free spells by the time it rolls back to you. It can hit a land and do absolutely nothing, and it is a do-nothing enchantment the turn you play it. You are potentially opening yourself up to things. But if your opponents are casting things to try to gain their upper hand on you, then you might no longer be able to do nothing about it. It's just a really cool card for blue. It does put a big target on your back, but anytime a card does that, it probably means it's pretty good in Commander. It just seems like a really fun card. I'm sure people are going to test it out and have a good time with it. So, yeah. So at number 2, I have Collective Effort. The other 2 efforts might find a place in EDH too, but I think this is the most powerful one in general and also the most promising for EDH. The one hoop you have to jump through to make this work is that your deck needs to be somewhat creature-based, and luckily white decks usually are. Paying 3 mana for all 3 of these modes is amazing. Enchantments are everywhere in EDH, so are creatures with power 4 or greater, and giving your creatures +1/+1 counters is just gravy after getting a 2-for-1. This thing seems too flexible to not show up in most white EDH decks that run a decent number of creatures. And then at number 1, we have a card that you may have guessed. We have Tree of Perdition. Of all the cards on this list, I think this is the one most likely to have the word staple attached to it in the near future. Don't get me wrong, the last few cards I talked about, especially Collective Effort and Tamio, have a real chance at being staples. But I'll go ahead and say that I think Tree of Perdition's a lock to be a staple in Commander. Anytime there's a card that can reset the abnormally high life totals in EDH, you start at 40, like Sorin Markov, for example, it becomes a staple. It becomes a pretty strong card. Granted, Sorin Markov's really the only really good example of that, but Tree of Perdition gives black 2 ways to do that, and people who are playing black commanders are definitely going to be wanting to run both of them. Now, Sorin Markov costs triple black, so it's probably mostly going to be mono black commanders, but it's definitely a sweet thing to have going on. You could also throw the Triskaidekaphobia combo into your deck if you really want to be crazy with Tree of Perdition, but I think it's just good in a vacuum in Commander. Black also has tons of tutors, so you could get it out pretty consistently, drop your opponent's life total 13 and kill them quickly. It just seems too good not to see play in Commander. So that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. Are there any cards I left off the list that you think are going to be great in Commander that I didn't talk about? Or are there any cards you think I'm overrating? Let me know in the comments. Also, don't forget to like if you found this video useful or entertaining. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to make sure you catch more MTG Top 10s. Thanks for watching.